It's August. We're in preseason camp. This is when you really put the hay in the barn before season starts in a couple weeks.
That's right. There's a lot of hitting going on across the campus, and we're curious to see how this one shakes out for the highly ranked Nittany Lions.
Time to get some fun for the Nittany Lions. Hey, you want to be in big games with stakes? They got a bunch of them coming up. Blue-White Pulse is next. Welcome everyone to Blue-White Pulse. I'm Steve Jones, Jay Paterno here, Audrey, Snyder, DK Sports. Audrey, welcome back. Great to have you with us.
Good to be back, Steve.
All right, so let's get to it. A lot of hype, obviously, surrounding the team. How do you have to handle that, Jay, when you have a team that really has a lot going for it coming into a preseason?
Well, it's going to be an interesting season for that reason because, Coach Franklin in his career has always been the underdog, so he's really always been playing with house money. Now he's the chased. Now that puts more pressure on, and you can talk about all you want, but it is a different dynamic when all of a sudden you're in the thick of it from day one. We'll see how that goes.
And Audrey, it's a week-by-week thing this year. I mean, you go along, the pressure is you can't stumble.
Absolutely. It's the hunter to the hunted, right? I mean, that's the thing we've heard so much about. Talked a lot about it at Big Ten Media Days as well. And, we've heard the phrase Akron, 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 Akron a lot this offseason, which really was the mantra last year that worked out quite well. So that's how it has to be. I mean, you can't overthink this thing because there's going to be a stumbling block along the way somewhere when you look at it. But if you keep it locked in week to week, better chance to see how it goes.
So let's hear from James Franklin. How do you handle the hype surrounding the season and the program?
Let's not, it's not like I'm asking them to bury their head in the sand and act like that didn't happen. They earned that. So, recognize that. But on the other hand, those points aren't going to carry over and those wins aren't going to carry over. And we had guys that had critical roles on that team that are no longer with us anymore. So, we just have to be disciplined enough not to get caught up in the hype.
All right, so let's take a look at the polls, okay? This is where it all starts out, even though neither one of these means anything going in. First of all, the coaches poll, sponsor eliminated. Penn State is number 6 in that poll, so Clemson, USC, Florida State, Ohio State, Alabama in front of them. And then there's the Big Ten media poll heading into the season divisionally, and you see Penn State right behind Ohio State. So look, it's at least a great, quote, starting point, even though the polls won't figure into the college football playoff. They do it on their own.
I mean, Halloween's when the first playoff poll comes out. Everybody's going to want to know that. They'll be looking for that. But for now, I mean, they're consensus number 6 team. But you look at, again, their path potentially to the playoff. All it comes down to that game in Columbus with that lovely 3:30 kick, right?
Yeah, well, thank the World Series for that.
Absolutely.
Let's get Andrew Nelson. This has been a road for them. He committed to the program at an interesting time. And the journey's been gratifying to see them sitting in this spot for him.
To us, the fact that, obviously we're ranked in the top 10 going in, it's just to show how far we've come. Amidst the guys that were here during the sanctions, guys like me and Brendan that committed here during the sanctions, I mean, just to see how we were able to turn this program around, I mean, it's very rewarding, to say the least.
Jay, when you hear something like that from somebody who made a commitment when he didn't know what it was going to be like in 2017, what does that tell you about him?
Tells you a lot about him. Tells you this is a guy that believed in Penn State and what Penn State has always stood for. And it's great to see Penn State where we are now, because up until the firing of Joe Paterno, that's where we were. The number of top 10 seasons, 8-1 at that time, and when that happened, a lot of other things went into motion, and it's great to see Penn State where we are, and people walking around proud again, people walking around with their chest out a little bit, and let's just hope that translates through the rest of the year.
Right, but you have to start somewhere, and you want to start here. You don't want to start 26. You want to start 6.
Yep.
I mean that's what it comes down to. I mean, starting position does mean something. You see a guy like Nelson, you've covered him, Audrey. I mean, what kind of stand-up guy has he been?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's been great to deal with. And this is a guy, I mean, you look at all the adversity he's been through himself with the injuries, all that kind of stuff. The way he's rebounded, to me, it's going to be interesting to see what his role is this year. But no doubt about it, he's one of the leaders of this team.
All right, coming up, we'll take a look at this Penn State offense as they get geared up for this season as Blue White Pulse continues after this. Well, we welcome everyone back. I remember last year I went to the Duquesne Club, and every year they do a poll as to what you think the record's going to be, and the tiebreaker was points. And of course they went to the 2015 season, and the guy won with, I think, 281 points, and the Nate scored 282. And I made some comment, I said, I can guarantee you're not going to score 282 points this year. I said, they went way above and beyond that. When you watch something hit stride, and I'll start with Audrey and go to Jay, what's it like watching when something hits stride?
It's a work of art. I mean, to me, I always go back to the Big Ten title game, and you see this thing, it gets going, you're thinking, okay, there's one big play here, there, but really, the second half of last year, I think you go back, of course, the Minnesota play with Irv Charles, and look at it from there on out. It's impressive, and Joe Moorhead kind of took some criticism about people maybe saying this offense just chucks it up, which, to quote Joe, said was ridiculous at best and asinine at worst, and it's true. I mean, this thing, when it gets going, we've seen all the pieces. It's really, really impressive, and there's no reason to believe it won't be that again this year.
And as a play caller, what's it like to sit there knowing you've got weapons and you are in a comfort level with what you want to do whenever you want?
Well, according to the fan base, that never existed when I was coaching. But you know,
yeah, but I'm asking the question. I know better.
I know. You know, the great thing is there's really great versatility, especially with 26, and we're going to talk about him as we go. But when you have guys that you can move around, chess pieces that you can move around, it's a matter of what comes to you and what you can. You're only limited by your imagination and by their ability to learn. That's the other key part. Is you can only do as much as they can handle mentally, and that's going to be the. Hopefully there's that check in place that you're not getting out there and have guys making mistakes. But it's a lot of fun. Yeah,
for Joe Moorhead, yes, it is a lot of fun for him, and he's also excited about what this team can do.
Can generate a game plan and know that a team can focus on stopping the run, and we're able to beat them with the pass, or vice versa, and have a lot of weapons in the pass game as well as Saquon, and have a great offensive line up front. So it makes the game plan process very fun, and hopefully exciting on game day.
There have been a lot of great running backs around here, Jay, that have the versatility that Saquon Barkley has now. When you have someone that is really good in all three phases, blocking, receiving, especially in the open field, and how he runs, what does that do for an offensive coordinator?
Well, it gives you a chess match, because if you're a defensive coordinator, you say, well, 26 is a threat in the pass game. Let's blitz keep him in. Okay, now you blitz keep him in. You're going to have some more. You're going to leave zones open. You're going to have guys one-on-one. Okay, let's not blitz. Well, now how are we going to cover him? Am I going to bring in a dime? I bring in a dime. So it really creates a matchup problem for the defense coordinator, and they got to commit to what they want to do.
And when you have a dynamic duo, starting with your quarterback, Trace McSorley, let's look at some of the numbers. Here are some of the records that he's been able to set. I mean, 3,614 yards, 5 300-yard passing games, on and on we go. As you watched McSorley grow last season, Audrey, what struck you about that growth?
Man, it was the turnovers early on. That was the thing that a lot of people were kind of saying, oh, this issue. And then, of course, people remember the pick in the Rose Bowl, obviously Pitt game as well. But you take that out of there, and statistically, his season was one of the best that Penn State's had from a quarterback in a long time. And I just think, he was really critical when I talked to him in the offseason about his footwork. He thinks that's an area where he can improve this year. But the deep shots down the field, yes, that's one thing. It's a huge part of his game. Yep. But when he's on the run, his eyes are downfield, man, it's such a threat for teams to see what he can do. And he's a smart guy as well. And now year two, he knows what he's doing better.
If I heard your Uncle George say once, I heard him say it 100 times, don't forget the tight end, right? Right? How much do you think Uncle George would like this tight end to Gesicki?
Well, he liked him as a receiver. He might be critical of him sometimes as a blocker, but I think Mike's made great strides in that regard. But he reminds me a lot of the guy Matt Kranchuk because of his height and his speed. And Matt played, I forget how many years in the pros, but Matt was a guy that you could, you had to. Am I going to put a big safety on? Am I going to put a linebacker on? How am I going to cover this guy?
Right, and he's worked hard in his blocking.
Absolutely.
And your father appreciated guys that played basketball, and Mike was an elite basketball player in high school.
Oh, I think the skills translate so well. I mean, you look at how many guys played. Tony Stewart played basketball in high school. I mean, all the guys. Kyle Brady was a basketball player in high school. So many of those guys that Mickey Schuler as well, both of them. played basketball in high school. So, yeah, those skills cross over quite a bit.
This doesn't happen without the offensive line making strides. Brendan Mann says they're ready to be a really top-flight offensive line.
I think that whole, persona's continued for centuries, for years, for a long time, and kind of living up to that, Big Ten offensive line, and not just that, but the Penn State, hard-nosed football and blue-collar football, and I think that's really our goal this year is to, kind of show everyone that last year wasn't just, a fluke. And
Jay, it has to start there. I mean, it really has to start there.
No question. And when you look at this offensive line, potentially, obviously we don't know, it's not set in stone, but you look at an offensive line that could average 315, 320 across the front. Now, the question is it a good 315, good 320? Because I've always coached guys that, hey, I want to be 330. It's not a good 330. Because this offense requires athleticism up front, especially with the defenses you're going to play. So, but I think there's a great potential there.
And there's one guy, of course, that went pro, and that was Chris Godwin. So, Audrey, where do the catches go there?
Saquon Barkley, I think, is going to be a big piece of that. I mean, that's going to be a lot. And Gesicki, the guy that we talked about as well. I mean, he's the team's leading pass catcher coming back, and you got to think those numbers go through the roof. And Barkley, getting him in space more is something that Penn State's talked about a lot this offseason. Joe Moorhead mentioned it. James Franklin mentioned it. So now it's just a matter of going out and doing it.
What about a guy like Juwan Johnson?
Certainly he'll factor in. I mean, that's a guy who they're very, very high on. They were this spring. That's carried through to the summer. They're looking at a breakout campaign, and you just look at Juwan, and the thing that kind of impressed me, the size of this guy's hands, Steve. Yeah. Massive. I think he's a guy who's we're going to see have a breakout year.
Yep, and a guy very serious about his craft. I mean, that's something where he's a hard worker. Coming up, a hard-working defense. They'll have to be even better this year. We'll talk about that after this on Blue White Pulse. All right, Blue White Pulse comes back. We've talked offense. Now we're going to talk defense. I was talking with Brent Pry the other day, and he said, Jason Cabinda's in a really good spot right now. When you look at a guy like Cabinda, fourth-year player, Audrey, I mean, that's a quarterback on the defense. What could he mean to them?
He's going to have to have a good year. I mean, they're going to need him. I mean, the questions for me with this team, it starts up front. You look at the D-line, everything that they're replacing there, they have depth. But I'm not so sure that they have the playmakers right now to do that. And linebackers have the depth this year. Cabinda, really smart guy, too. I mean, every time you talk to him, I'm kind of blown away just by the maturity and all of those aspects off the field. But they're going to need him, and they're going to need a guy like Cam Brown, too. Who's athletically somebody that we haven't seen that size and speed at that position in a while.
And Jason Cabinda has the attitude I think a coach wants to hear. We can do the same thing as last year, but it might not be good enough. And that's why he says they have to be better.
I think a lot of people just want to talk about, last year's success. And, for us, I mean, that's forgotten. It's in the past. That's last year's team. It's a whole new team. We need to build our identity and build this team from the ground up. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. A lot of people just assume that, whatever happened last year kind of carries over, and that's just not the case. I'd argue that if we put in the same effort as we put in last year, that we might not even get the same result.
And a coach needs to hear that.
That's exactly what you want to hear. And, every time I see that guy talk, I'm impressed with his poise. I'm impressed with his maturity. And he, of all the guys I've seen, seems like the one that has gotten the least caught up in all the hype. And maybe you guys see them more than I do. But he's just an outstanding representative. And the idea that if you do the same as you did last year, you won't get the same results, that's absolutely true.
Brent Pry called defenses before. I mean, he's done that. But, then there's a hiatus where you had to go back and do it again. As a play caller, how long did it take for the speed of the game to slow down for you as a play caller, Jay?
Well, after a game or two, you start to figure it out.
Yeah.
But, I think you look at what they did last year defensively. They did some great things in the second half. I mean, everybody talks about the comeback in the second half by the points that were scored. They're overlooking the fact that the defense continually got them the ball back and held people scoreless in second halves or really shut them down. And I think he did a really good job.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't talk about that fact. I mean, Michigan State was a great example. Well, even the Wisconsin game, for goodness sakes. I mean, they only gave up 3 points in the second half.
Yep.
I mean, you have to do things like that. Koa Farmer made that move last year, the outside, Audrey. It looked like he started playing his game and not trying to play what he thought a linebacker should be playing.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got a skill set there, Steve, that, again, kind of like Cam Brown, that Penn State fans haven't seen this in a while. I mean, one of the fastest guys on the team who's actually gotten bigger this offseason, but yet has maintained that speed. I mean, that's scary, and Koa should be a guy who figures in to be a starter. We'll see how Cam Brown does as well. But when you have guys like that and that athleticism, man, you've got a lot of toys at your disposal.
How hard is it, let's get to the secondary, how difficult is it, Jay, to play secondary defense with the way today's game is played?
Well, the thing about college football is you get so many different types of offense. I mean, you're going to play, when you're practicing every day against Penn State, you're against a spread offense. You get into week 7 or week 8 or whatever it is, you're going to be playing Michigan with a lot of 2 and 3 tight ends, and that's a whole different world. And that's the thing that's difficult about college football. Now, I don't know, when you look at Ohio State goes in the practice field every day and they work on Michigan because that's unique and different. And that's how they approach it, because they're going against the spread. But a guy, when you bring guys up in the secondary, you're going to need some guys that come up and tackle. You're going to need some guys that can take on those things. And I think, the one thing you might say about Penn State secondary right now is they may not quite have that size, that 225 safety that comes up and plays around the ball. But we'll see. I mean, they've shown toughness, so that's that's more important than size.
And turnovers can happen when you have pressure up front. Brent Pry likes the defensive line rotation.
I love Spence's rotation and what he's done with those guys. And to be honest, that goes on all year long. Spring ball, camp, that's not something you can just turn on Saturdays. Those guys have to understand how quickly that can change when a guy's injured. Depending on the snaps in a drive, there's a learning process there, and being able to rotate the way we do. It's not easy to do.
It's not easy to do, but it also keeps people fresh. And now when you get into this particular scenario like they're in now, you lose some players, but you have a bunch of players who have already played.
Yeah, it's huge, Steve. And when I sat down with Sean Spencer this offseason, he said, listen, people look at this line, it's a question mark. But when you have guys like Torrance Brown, who, okay, maybe he's new to the starting role, but man, he's played a lot of valuable football, and really there's no way to kind of substitute that out. You have the experience or you don't, and they've got a lot of guys, while younger, while newer, they do have the game experience.
Right, and the game experience is the key part. They understand game speed at this point. All right, coming up, we'll tie up some loose ends, as only we can, as we continue with Blue White Pulse and wrap it up in a moment after this. All right, welcome back. Great to have you with us as we hit the stretch run here. An issue that has come up, and James Franklin's not the one that's brought it up, is the fact of a contract extension. And he was rather blunt about where everything stands right now.
I'm in football mode now, so I'm focused on the season. We've been talking about this, for a while, and I feel good about it. I don't have any concerns, but my focus is on our team and the 2017 season completely. I'm not, Chris will tell you, we get interview requests, we get this, we get that. Once the season starts, it changes a little bit for me. So I kind of put the blinders on and jump in the submarine, and to me, everything that we do and I do is about getting the team ready to be successful.
Media is different now, especially with social media, Jay, but is it possible to put yourself in that bubble where it's just you and the team?
Well, usually these guys have agents, so the agents kind of handle any contract stuff for them. So they may get a call 5 weeks in and say, hey, they want to do something. I mean, that's all stuff that's handled by other people. And the reality is he's got a couple years left on his contract. It's not imminent. And, that we've gotten so impatient that one good season, let's extend it. Let's see what happens. And he's probably the same mindset.
He just wants to win games now.
Play football, coach football.
And that's what he wants to do. And Audrey, the recruiting, though, has continued. They may be in preseason, but they're still getting commitments even in the preseason.
Yeah, they're up to 22 kids right now, and, could be 23 at any moment, Steve, for all we know, the way this thing's been rolling. And this is a class that's number 3 in the nation, and you look at who they're chasing, of course, Miami, Ohio State at that top spot. It's really, really impressive. I mean, when James Franklin got here, everybody said, watch how recruiting's going to change. Well, we've seen it on the field with a lot of his guys that he brought in, and now we're continuing to see it in recruiting. It's really impressive and mind-blowing in many ways, too, because they're getting guys nationally that before they weren't even in conversations with.
Jay, how important were scrimmages to you in the preseason? Only so many you can have, but how much of a role did they play and who played?
Scrimmages are a big deal because that's where you find out who can handle playing through pain. And I know that's not a PC thing to say anymore, and people are very uptight about the number of hits that go on practice. But you know, football is a game that has to be played to get better at it, and you have to tackle, and you have to, but you got to pick your spots, and you got to be smart about it. And a guy like McSorley or Barkley, they don't need to carry the ball 15 times in scrimmage, but you got your younger guys, and that's where you find out something about your depth.
How tough are those conversations, Jay, when you finally have to make the decision who's on the scout team and who's on the quote varsity group?
Well, it's always tough, and there's a day or two where you really have to process it. And the kids have to process when they realize I'm probably not in the mix this year, especially redshirt freshman guys, because they all come in with the hype and the excitement, and all of a sudden they got to call home and say I'm redshirt, and you know, all of a sudden everyone's disillusioned. But you know, you get through it, and ultimately you work through it.
Audrey had a chance to go around and talk to as many players as possible. What's the general impression you received from the players you talked to?
This is a loose group, and you know, we talked about the expectations and all that kind of stuff, but this is a team that they genuinely like each other, and I think people maybe take that for granted, and especially in college football where you're living together, you're doing every little thing together. And you know, I was talking with Shaka Tony about it, and he was saying, he's like, man, I just love these guys. And he said, I'm from Philadelphia, and I'm not used to that kind of camaraderie on a team, but these guys really do have that, and I think that maybe is something that we don't pay enough attention to as sports writers.
Well, the next time we do this show, Trey Bauer is going to be sitting there. And Todd
griping about Ole Miss and Alabama.
And Todd,
and Notre Dame.
And Todd Sadowski will be back. Todd had a sit down, by the way, with Joe Moorhead, which we'll have in our first Blue-White tailgate coming up. But Audrey, thanks a lot for the time you gave us. As always, it's been great having you.
You got it.
Here.
It's been fun.
Jay, always a pleasure. We'll see you for the first Blue-White tailgate as well coming up. And that'll be our next show. It'll be the Blue-White tailgate show. Todd Sadowski, Trey Bauer will join Jay and myself for the show. Thanks for being with us.